We have got Josh Myers joining us with the American Legislative Exchange Council. He is the director of the Task Force on Tax and Fiscal Policy. We've had him on this program many times before. Joey, if you want to hit the button, we'll bring him in officially as our VIP guest of the day for today's Speaker Stump Speech.
I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius.
It's time for the Speaker Stump Speech, sponsored by Hanson's Tree Service at hansonstree.com.
Josh, good afternoon. I think you're joining us from what Jonathan Williams, the president of ALEC, the chief economist there, one of the authors of Rich States, Poor States, describes as the land of make-believe in Washington, D.C. So, Josh, I bet you're so happy to help put Rich States, Poor States together every year to see that, yes, there are success stories all across the country, and it has nothing to do with the lack of doing anything usually successfully in our nation's capital.
That's exactly right, Tim. And, every year for the last 19 years, Dr. Arthur Laffer, Steve Moore, and Jonathan Williams have published the Rich States, Poor States Index on Tax Week. And our goal is to make Tax Week a little bit more fun for those of us who like comparing the states.
Jonathan, one of the questions that I had, you've been doing this for 19 years, and I guess these states are ranked by their competitiveness. Does the rankings change very much, or do they pretty much stay the same every year?
That's a great question, Chris. And it really varies state to state. One of the big stories from Rich States, Poor States is that Utah ranks number one this year for the 19th consecutive year. So Utah has been the only state to hold that top spot. And conversely, New York has been 50th, bottom of the rankings for most of the years. But all around the middle of the rankings, the states are shifting, moving around, competing for positions. We see stories of states that cut taxes, embrace free market policy, and shoot up in the rankings, attract migration, grow their economies, and really reward the workers in their state. And we see on the flip side, states that increase taxes, hurt their economies, take more out of the pockets of business owners and working individuals, punish productivity, and they conversely go down in the rankings and see an out-migration of those residents.
Josh, let's talk about the rankings themselves and about the 19th edition. Josh, if folks are thinking, oh, this is just some, conservative right wing or think tank that just puts this forth for talking points, I think you and I would both push back hard on that, because Rich States, Poor States, Josh, explain to us the economic metrics. Like, the numbers don't lie. The numbers don't have political biases, right? And I believe that the two together for each and every of the 50 states, the economic performance rank, which is backwards looking on how they did the year before, and then the economic outlook rank, the forecast for how they might perform in the year ahead, are based, I believe, on about 15 different metrics that have been pretty constant over the last almost 20 years. So talk about that. And then, so we don't bury the lead, where's Missouri in all of this year?
Yes, those are some good points, Tim. So the ranking looks at 15 variables that are important for how Americans decide where to move, where to live, how do capital and people allocate themselves all around the country, and how are these competitive dynamics between the states playing out. And as Art Laffer always likes to say, these aren't right wing or left wing. They're not Republican or Democrat. It's just economics. And in fact, we heard recently, a few weeks ago, New York Governor Kathy Hochul was asked in an interview about some of these dynamics and said, listen, we know even in New York, we're losing people, we're losing businesses, and we are living in these same competitive dynamics as the rest of the state. So Rich States, Poor States, we like to say, is kind of a scorecard. It's how are you doing compared to the other states? Looking forward, how do you compare? And Missouri ranks 19th for its economic outlook in this most recent edition of Rich States, Poor States. That's up 5 places from 24th last year.
Josh, as you stated, there are 15 different variables. They range from sales tax burden to property tax burden to state minimum wage. For a simple guy like me, explain how you measure all of these to come up with the index.
Yeah, so it's really, we look at what are the important factors that are driving the ways that businesses and people think about the economy. And so, of course, taxes play a prominent role, right? Income tax gets taken out of every paycheck. So that's at the top of our website. It's one of the top things we look at, but also taxes on business. And there are other non-tax variables too, including right to work policies, minimum wages, and things like that.
Josh, in looking at once again at Missouri, we did, as you mentioned, we Missouri went up this year. We had been slowly kind of ticking downwards over the last decade or so, but Missouri, I believe, went up 4 or 5 spots this year in the index. We're still kind of in the right, like we still need to do a lot better. But can you explain why Missouri on the economic forecast went from, I think, the mid 20s up to 19th place? So why do we have a what put us into the top 20 as far as economic outlook rank, and what makers be considering to potentially move us higher?
Yeah, Tim, this is a great point, and one of the great the most valuable things about having 19 years worth of data is we can look back over time and tell stories. So Missouri reached its all-time low in the rankings of 31st in 2023, and it's been on this uptick that you mentioned since then. And we attribute that in Rich States, Poor States to the income tax cuts that have happened over multiple years. And this most recent improvement is due largely to the capital gains tax elimination that was enacted in the legislature last year and went into effect this year in Missouri. So when we're thinking about how can Missouri continue to improve, you know, one of the trends we're seeing all around the country, not just in Missouri, not just in the Midwest or the South or the West, but all around, is a trend of states falling behind by standing still. And so there are other states where policymakers rest on their laurels, they don't look to improve, and the states actually fall behind because all around the country we're seeing so many states cutting taxes. 26 states, including Missouri, of course, have cut personal income tax rates just since 2021. And there are 3 other states that are on track to eliminate their personal income tax. Several states have switched from progressive taxes to flat taxes in just the last 5 years. So this is an incredibly competitive environment where the states are moving really fast. And if you sit still for one moment and think, we've done enough, we're good, you know, these changes are satisfactory, then other states will outcompete you. They'll attract the businesses, they'll attract workers, they will really open up their economies. And as Steve Moore said in that quote just before this, they really turn on those open for business signs.
Speaking with Josh Meyer, he's Director's Tax and Fiscal Policy Task Force at ALEC. We're speaking with him about the 19th edition of Rich States, Poor States. Josh, I want to ask you, these 15 variables, have they stayed pretty static over the last 15 years? And, you know, AI is a big issue right now, of course. Could that be a potential variable in the future of how states have embraced AI and data centers, and that can help them grow, or does that just get lumped into another variable?
That's a great question, Chris. And one of the beauties of Rich States, Poor States is that the variables have stayed the same over 19 years, and they're really focused on the subject of economic policy. So we at ALEC have other reports on issues like education freedom and energy policy, but Rich States, Poor States focuses in on the economy and those things that are most important there. There are definitely other factors that matter for migration, like some of those things I mentioned, potentially AI in the future. You know, we know that weather probably factors into migration decisions, although perhaps not as much as you might think, because California, of course, is one of the top out-migration states, with taxpayers and residents fleeing California and moving to states like Missouri.
Josh, when you look at the if you had no idea what list you were looking at or who published it, but if you just looked at the ALEC rankings over the last decade, almost 2, I think a lot of people, if they're being honest with themselves, just straight common sense, they would say, oh, yeah, the top 10 states. Yeah, those are the states I hear about all the time on the news and all kinds of stories that people are apparently moving to. You look at your Utahs and your Tennessees and your North Carolinas and your Arizonas and your Floridas and your Texases. And then, Josh, you look at the bottom of the list. And once again, it's pretty intuitive, isn't it? It's your New Yorks and New Jerseys and Californias and Illinois and Connecticut's. Josh, this is further corroborated and proven by other completely non-political entities like the U-Haul index, so to speak, in measuring income migration, right? So ALEC's numbers, ALEC's data, ALEC's studies are definitely corroborated and confirmed by what we actually see happening around the country. People are moving. The importance of this report, right, Josh? It shows what policies are attracting people to states and what policies are driving them away. Your comments on that?
That's exactly right, Tim. And one of the kind of founding principles of this report is an idea we in economics call revealed preferences. So when a consumer or a taxpayer or resident does something that really impacts their way of life, voting, for instance, is not a revealed preference because, you vote, you're one out of many voters, and your vote doesn't always have a direct, explicit, clear economic impact on your day-to-day life. But we say people voting with their feet, that it's picking up, moving their family, moving their business to another state, that's a revealed preference because it has an immediate, concrete effect on their economic well-being, right? And so we say that these revealed preferences, what are people actually doing when it really comes down to brass tacks? What are they doing with their families? What are they doing with their pocketbooks? What are they doing with their businesses? What are the true preferences of American taxpayers? And Rich States, Poor States is based on the principle and the policies behind that principle.
Josh, I'm curious, do you guys ever hear from the leaders of these states that don't do well in the rankings? And if you do, what excuses do they give for their poor showing?
That's a great question, Chris. I think one of the things we hear most often is that taxes don't matter. People try to make this argument that no one moves for tax reasons and taxes don't actually matter. People move for other things. And again, they come up with other examples like weather I mentioned earlier, but I'm a former Californian myself. And so kind of test personally that it is not a decisive economic factor. But they make these arguments about taxes not mattering. And I think part of the Rich States, Poor States over 19 years is to show that that's not quite right, because you look at these top ranked states and they're gaining taxpayers. People are moving there. So you're going to make the argument that taxes don't matter. What exactly is it that matters when people are moving to Florida, to Texas, to Tennessee, and we see these changes. Stories have changed over the course of the reports where states, improve their policy competitiveness and then see, an influx of economic activity and residents as a result. So it seems pretty clear over the 19 editions of Rich States, Poor States that economic policy is the definitive factor here. And perhaps it's not taxes directly for some people, but it's that taxes help to create that free and growing economy that creates job opportunities and growth and wage increases the value of workers, brings in more customers for businesses. And so even if it's not the tax rate explicitly that someone's saying, I moved for the taxes, they moved for the growing economy, the increasing opportunity that taxes and free market economic policy help to build.
Josh, I want to commend you all for nearly 20 years. And I know next year will be the big 20th year anniversary edition of Rich States, Poor States. Josh, it's very for all of us non-economists, unlike you smart Uber super wonky people. I want to commend you for putting something together that's very easy to understand. It's very easy to access. I was able to look at the entire PDF in like 3 seconds. It's got charts and pictures and graphs for those of us who like those sorts of things. And it's got really easy to understand metrics that all make a lot of sense. Josh, where can people find Rich States, Poor States, and where can they learn more about ALEC?
People can find Rich States, Poor States and the website's very easy, richstatespoorstates.org. And there you can find the whole rankings. There's a map. You can click around and check out Missouri, compare states. You can even see what would happen if we changed policies in Missouri and how that would affect the state's ranking. That's richstatespoorstates.org. And folks who want to learn more about ALEC can do so at alec.org, ALEC.org.
And let's not forget you, Josh. If someone wants to read your material, you're on X at jmeyer01223. Is that correct?
That's right, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Josh, so much for your time, and have a great weekend, my friend.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tim.